Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Dead Man's Eyes, 1944. Dead Man's Eyes was the third of Universal's Inner Sanctum mystery supporting features starring Lon Chaney Jr. in casting one of its horror stars and sometimes straying tangentially into darker material. The series earns a mention in horror reviews. After our previous episode, that year's Weird Woman, the next in line was a bit of a marketing red herring. The title promises one of those lurid, by now familiar genre plots concerning donor organs transmitting their owner's homicidal impulses into a new host. The actual story is much more a crime whodunit, where the results of the grafting matter less than the love triangle and murder sleuthery. If you think that's disappointing, you haven't seen the woeful performances under the hack direction of Reginald Leborg, whose work we've already endured in the previous film, plus Jungle Woman and The Mummy's Ghost. Chaney plays struggling painter Dave Stewart, on paper a suitable role, suggesting the kind of tortured soul possibilities that he was known for, particularly as the cursed Larry Talbot in the Wolfman franchise. Initially, he's a happy man with marriage to the lovely Heather Hayden, Jean Parker, and her wealthy family to look forward to, while looking on with smoldering jealousy is his dark-eyed model Tanya, Aquanetta. In the early calm before the storm scenes, as in other films, Chaney always looks unconvincing when called upon to convey the relaxed demeanor of the light leading man. We know, though, that he is biding his time until he can get stuck into some no doubt masochistic heavy lifting. There is no such relief for or from Aquanetta, however, who is utterly wooden throughout the entire picture. We've already experienced her as the titular captive wild woman and jungle woman, in which the studio tried to project a raw, native islander image for the real-life Mildred Davenport of Wyoming. In those films, her lack of talent squeaked by, passed off as a hypnotized, otherworldly exoticism. Here, in a modern dress role, she is more exposed than in a jungle loincloth, her character's profession only being apt since it would allow her long periods of inexpressiveness. Fortunately, it isn't long before Chaney's awkward bliss crash dives into screaming reality when he accidentally bathes his tired eyes with acetic acid instead of eye wash, resulting in crippling blindness. Dr. Wells, the Blondie series' Jonathan Hale, warns that his mental state will not be good for a while. Tragically good news for horror fans. Less welcome is the opportunity the plot complexities keep providing for Aquanetta to demonstrate sub-zero emotional temperature. Tanya feels guilty, if you can tell, confessing to Dave's prospective father-in-law, Daddy Hayden, Edward Fielding, that she may have mistakenly placed the wrong bottle near Dave. "You must believe me," she pleads drearily. Hayden rounds on her, matching her mahogany dressing table with a fitted wardrobe of his own bad acting. You, he emotes, waiting for an interruption that awkwardly never arrives. Tanya then positions herself as Dave's nurse. Was this a scheme of hers all along? It's impossible to say, as she's unable to telegraph any subtlety of nuance. In that respect, so is the screenplay, the first by Leborg collaborator Dwight V. Babcock, who went on to supply either full scripts for a multitude of low-grade horror films or storylines. For example, the Rondo Hatton 1946 creeper vehicles House of Horrors and The Brute Man. His dialogue works on fewer levels than a broken elevator, sabotaging even those of the supporting cast who are semi-decent, forcing them to simply state their innermost thoughts in clunking exposition. When Daddy Hayden is found dead after offering to donate Dave his corneas post-mortem, Dave, who is found by Helen at the scene, becomes chief suspect. This prompts Thomas Gomez, the blustery Count Seabrook we'll see in the Boris Karloff lush vehicle The Climax, who fancies himself the amateur shrink, to aim his portly Captain Drury at psychiatrist Alan Bittaker, scoping for motivational insights. Blindness is a serious thing to happen to an artist, proving he shouldn't give up the cop day job just yet. By sheer coincidence, Paul Kelly, who plays Bittaker, was in real life convicted of manslaughter himself back in 1927, after the involuntarily fatal beating he gave to lover Dorothy Mackay's abusive ex-husband Ray Raymond. He was paroled in 1927 and rebuilt his life and career, leading to a Tony Award, a tie with Basil Rathbone and Henry Fonda for Command Decision on Broadway. Regular listeners to my podcasts will know of my fondness for studying horror movie newspaper front pages, and Babcock's screenplay hits us with such unsubtle gems as "Blind murder suspect to receive dead man's eyes," for those who were out getting alcohol or sedatives when this plot information was already clearly given. For added amusement, to the right of the aforementioned header is a nostalgia piece about a boxer titled "Looks Back to Good Old Days." The kind of unintentional pun that has me always freeze-framing these covers when they appear. With films as bad as this, you must find your entertainment value where you can, because there's very little that's deliberate. After Tanya is mercifully silenced by a shadowy figure, Drury remarks a priceless tribute upon admiring Dave's portrait. That's a great painting of her. Captures her warmth and her passion. Since neither quality was evident in the sitter's performance, it's only fitting that it actually looks like someone else. Dead Man's Eyes could have redeemed itself if reworked as a full-blooded B-movie horror vehicle, in which the eye graft possessed the power to plague Chaney with visions of, let's say, real guilt, for example, or if he was the beneficiary of a killer's peepers as the grisly covert experiment of a mad scientist, Karloff, Lugosi, or if wet, George Zucco. Instead, we are treated to amdram theatrics of Alan being in love with Tanya and Heather propositioned by lounge lizard Nick, who dissolves later into the seemingly incriminating gibber, "You're all against me!" By the time we discover Dave concealed the success of his eyesight restoration to catch the real killer, I was longing for some unrestrained nuttiness to liven up the soap opera. Despite the solved mystery, when it comes to quality filmmaking, the team behind Dead Man's Eyes haven't a clue. The Frozen Ghost, 1945. 1945 was a disappointing time for ghost hunters. After Republic's May release of The Vampire's Ghost alluded to non-existent phantoms, the fourth film in Universal's Inner Sanctum series 2 weeks later, The Frozen Ghost, also contained zero spectral activity, being instead a reference to the suspended animation undergone by victims on screen and possibly in the audience. The Frozen Ghost was another chance for Universal to channel the luckless and tortured persona of Lon Chaney Jr. into a scenario still capitalizing on his doomed breakout role of 1941's The Wolfman. As with the previous entry, Dead Man's Eyes, he is an innocent man convinced he is the unwitting architect of murder around him. He plays Alex Gregor, a celebrated stage hypnotist, who one night has to handle a belligerent drunk invited up during a live radio show broadcast. "It's all done with mirrors," the lush insists. Wishing the rude man dead, Gregor finds that his power inadvertently does just that during the trance state. Although his loyal manager George Keane, Milburn Stone, emphasizes the man was a terminal alcoholic, Gregor torments himself with guilt, the default setting for a Chaney protagonist. Stone went on to appear as Doc Adams across the entire 20-year run of TV's Western show Gunsmoke, and here gives a focused, slightly gangster-esque turn, a manner borne out by later plot developments. Evelyn Ankers also works out her studio contract by being plugged in gamely as Gregor's stage assistant and fiancée Maura. She becomes part of a virtual love quartet encircling Gregor when he's supposed to be gaining recuperative relief as a lecturing guest lodger at the Wax Museum run by Madame Monet. Tala Birrell, Maxine in 1944's The Monster Maker, which we've already covered. Gregor doesn't know that Monet is painting him into a corner with her secret amorous self-interest. Meanwhile, her niece Nina, Eleanor Verdugo, has a harmless crush on this showbiz superstar, recalling the more damaging obsession she had with Chaney's Larry Talbot in House of Frankenstein. What meager entertainment there is belongs to Douglas Dumbrill and Martin Kozlek, on opposite sides of the law. Dumbrill's distinguished demeanor graced a number of classic movies. Marx Brothers fans will know him from his beleaguered suave villainy in A Day at the Races and The Big Store. Here, director Harold the Mummy's Tomb Young allows him to adjust his trademark cool smugness to fighting crime as intrepid Inspector Brandt, despite some ill-fitting slang accorded him by Bernard Schubert and Lucy Ward's dialogue. He gives a nicely underplayed nuance to lines like, "You're wrong, Maura. I'm a very understanding man." As Hollywood's resident purveyor of Nazi evil, Koslek cleaves closer to type as a memorable ex-plastic surgeon turned sinister waxwork designer Rudy Polden. His identification with Teutonic terror was such that Koslek played Hitler's Reich Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels in no less than 5 separate screen incarnations, during a movie career spanning over 50 years. No prizes for guessing that his imperious, high-cheekboned presence and penchant for knife-throwing mark him out as a co-conspirator of harm. Less obvious, though hinted at in performance, is that Keane is his racketeering partner. Together they schemed to unbalance Gregor into madness and sanitarium committal by drugging Gregor's victims into the aforementioned suspended state, though it's uncertain how they could benefit from his presumed wealth. Another logic gap appears courtesy of Gregor, when he gains enough clarity through his self-flagellation to turn his very real hypnotic talent into making Maura vividly recall Keane and Rudy's implication in Madame Monet's bungled death. How could she remotely observe acts she wasn't an actual witness to? Never mind, let us assume Gregor isn't the only half of this couple with a genuine paranormal ability, and discard that howler as casually as Rudy's accidental fall backwards into the furnace he intended to burn Nina in. With a rare levity, Chaney gets to end the film blithely telling Brandt now that it's all done with mirrors, although the frozen ghost is a pretty poor reflection of the actors available. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.